Breaking news coming in terms of a Waqf Amendment Act is what we're getting to know. So now what we're getting to know in terms of the Waqf Amendment, the Supreme Court has stayed the provision in the Waqf Amendment Act 2025 that a person should be a practitioner of Islam for 5 years to create a Waqf. The provision state till state governments frame rules on determining whether a person is a practitioner of Islam. So that's a major update we're getting to know. According to the order, we have held presumption is always on constitutionality of statute, and in rarest it can be done. We have found that entire act is challenged, but basic challenge was sections 3R, 3C, 14, and we have gone to legislative history from 1923 Act and considered prima facie challenge to each sections, and hearing parties was made out for entirety of it, but sections which are under challenge we have granted stay. Number 1, 3R, which needs 5 years as practicing Islam stands failed until rules are formed. It could lead to arbitrary exercise of powers is what we are getting to know. Secondly, 2C, proviso Waqf property shall not be treated as Waqf property. Thirdly, 3C, designed officer making challenge in revenue records permitting the collector to determine rights would be against separation of powers. Until finality, the rights of properties will not be affected, and until the title is not decided, neither Waqf will be disposed of the property. Fourthly, shall not consist of more than 4 non-Muslim members, and for state not more than 3. And lastly, section 23, ex officio officer must be from Muslim community. So that's the latest we are getting to know in terms of this interim order on pleas to stay the provisions of the Waqf Amendment Act 2025, which comprised of Chief Justice of India B.R. Gavai and Justice A.G. Masiha, and they had reserved their order. Earlier we have seen on May 22, remember viewers, now the order we can see I have broken it down. They have the Waqf interim order has been delivered by Supreme Court. Now joining me on the telecast is Sambhav Sharma. Sambhav, take us through the details that are coming in terms of this.
Well, absolutely. See, there are few points. Within 5 minutes, the Supreme Court has delivered a judgment, because it was the judgment was expected at 10:30, but the Supreme Court, as per notice, was hearing some other matter. But yes, the Supreme Court has passed now the judgment, and the very important provisions which Supreme Court has said in this particular case is: number 1, Supreme Court has stated the provision of Waqf Amendment Act requiring a person to be practitioner of Islam for 5 years to create a Waqf, and this particular provision was discussed in detail both in the Parliament and in the Supreme Court, where petitioners contended this particular provision, saying that it is encroachment on the Islamic practices, and here the Supreme Court has stayed this particular provision of the particular act, Waqf Amendment Act, and the Supreme Court has stayed this provision requiring a person to be practitioner of Islam for 5 years to create the Waqf. The another very important point which is stated is that this particular stay will continue till the state government frame rules as to determine whether the person is a practitioner of Islam or not, and I mean, it is up to the state government to frame the law, frame the rules on the practicing nature of Islam. Till the time this particular provision where it was required that the practitioner of Islam should be of 5 years to create the Waqf is stayed by the top court of the country. And also that Supreme Court has directed, as far as possible, Chief Executive Officer of the Waqf Board should be a Muslim. This is very clearly said by the Chief Justice of India while delivering this judgment, that as far as possible the CEO of the Waqf board should be a Muslim. Another very important provision of the Waqf Act, where inclusion of non-Muslims was contended and discussed heavily in the Parliament, in the Joint Parliamentary Committee, and also in the top court, Supreme Court, when Supreme Court heard this matter in detail. And here the Supreme Court has made it clear that the CEO of the Waqf board I mean, as far as possible, should be a Muslim. So, in a way, it's the direction to the authorities that the CEO of the Waqf board should be a Muslim. See, because the contention was from the petitioners is that this particular act is an encroachment on the rights of the Muslims and the minorities in the country, and that is why it should be stayed in a way. So Supreme Court has not stayed the entire act is one part of the story. Another thing is few provisions of this particular Waqf Amendment Act in a way modified, or rather stayed. The Supreme Court has stayed. The Supreme Court has also said in a way that as far as possible the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of the Waqf board, should be a Muslim. And as per this particular law, the Waqf Amendment Act, at the state level there should be a Waqf board, and now in this Waqf board the chief executive officer is to be a Muslim, or as far as possible it's a direction in a way to the authorities that as far as possible it should be a Muslim, the CEO should be Muslim. And also, but Supreme Court has refused to stay the amendment permitting appointment of non-Muslims. Now it is again very important. It was heavily discussed in the Parliament and in the Supreme Court that appointment of non-Muslim, this was major bone of contention, and here the Supreme Court has made it clear and refused to stay that a non-Muslim as a Waqf board member. So a non-Muslim could be a Waqf board member, but as far as possible the CEO of the Waqf board should be a Muslim, and Supreme Court has stayed this particular provision of this particular act, that the person to be practicing Muslim for 5 years to create a Waqf. This provision has been stayed by the top court of the country.
All right, Sambhav. Thank you for your input on that. Now joining me on the telecast is Jasmine, Jasmine, who's a lawyer, who's joining us on the telecast, lawyer, Supreme Court. Jasmine, now we have seen the Supreme Court has stayed on its order, and they have listed out precondition of 5 years as practicing Muslim has been stayed, and they have declined to stay the Waqf Amendment Act 2025 in its entirety, and observing that no case has been made out for such a sweeping order. And though it has noted that certain provisions may require interim protection, what exactly you make of this interim order?
Basically, this has just come in as a breaking news. We are all looking at it. What we see is that the 5-year amendment, 5-year requirement has been stayed. Now, what other interim protections are required? We'll have to examine this, because this has just come in.
I'll break it down for you, the sections and the granted stay part. Firstly, the 3R needs 5 years as practicing Islam stands failed until rules are formed. It would lead to arbitrary exercise of powers. Secondly, 2C proviso, Waqf property shall not be treated as Waqf property. Thirdly, 3C design officer making challenge in revenue records permitting the collector to determine rights would be against separation of powers. Until finality, the rights of properties will not be affected until the title is not decided. Neither Waqf will be dispossessed of the property. And fourthly, shall not consist of more than 4 non-Muslim members, and for state not more than 3. Lastly, Section 23, ex officio officer must be from Muslim community. So in terms of that, if you could break it down for our viewers, what exactly does this mean?
Essentially, from what we see now, it has basically concentrated on the fundamental of the Waqf Act, that is, it is for protection of Muslim properties, which are Waqf properties. And so it is natural and implicative that there should be Muslims on the board. There should be Muslims, non-Muslims should be restricted. That is one aspect. Second aspect is the interim protection granted is very correct and proper, because till a title is decided, till something is decided to dispossess somebody, would have grave ramifications. So this protective order will be very welcomed, I believe, because unless there is a finality of certain basic issues, to dispossess somebody would have very grave ramifications. So this is what I make out of it. The further aspects we are still seeing it's coming in.